Good afternoon and welcome to the University of Huddersfield for this General Election Special 2015. I'm joined today by colleagues from the Politics Department of the University, Dr. Arianna Giovannini, Dr. Catherine McGlynn and Dr. Sean McDade. My name's Dr. Andy Mycock. And we're going to be talking today about some of the issues that are going to come up both locally and nationally in the general election and give you some of the predictions, some of the ideas that we think are going to change this election and what we're going to see across country on May the 8th. I think one of the interesting aspects is going to be in the local area within Kirklees, Colne Valley and Dewsbury. And it's highly unlikely that we're going to see a significant political change. Particularly in Huddersfield, it's likely that Barry Sherman will retain his seat, and even Jason McCartney in Colne Valley, although he'll have a challenge from Jane Leakes, will survive. I think where we will see change will be in Dewsbury. It's highly likely that Simon Reevell will lose his seat to Paula Sheriff. And across Yorkshire more widely, it is likely that we're going to see that there's going to be some shrinkage of coalition MPs, particularly we're going to see possibly in Pudsey, in Keighley, in Bradford West, seats held by Liberal Democrats and by Conservatives fall to Labour. So Yorkshire will go a little bit more red rather than blue or yellow. But across the country as a whole, this idea of territorial politics is one of those things that goes to drive the election at the moment. And I think this is part of what we wanted to explore today in the politics team. And with me is Dr. Arianna Giovannini, who is an expert in regional politics across England. And she's going to discuss some of the issues that might come up across the rest of across the rest of England.
Okay, well, in the context of the imminent general election, if we focus on England, this is interesting to see that for the first time, all of the main political parties have developed some kind of policy or strategies to address what is known as the English question. So. We see the Conservatives, for example, they focus in particular on what is called English votes for English laws. At the same time, the Labour Party is trying to give more relevance to the city regional dimension or the county regional dimensions. The Liberal Democrats are focusing on the local scale. So all of the main parties are basically in their manifestos are trying to say that one way or another there is going to be some form of devolution for England. This is something new, certainly in the context of British politics, but there is also at the moment another very interesting element, which is the rise of regionalist parties within England. So again, for the first time at this general election, we see parties such as Yorkshire First running for seats, basically. So Yorkshire First obviously is based in Yorkshire. The party is fielding 14 candidates across the region. And the interesting point here is that while the approach of the mainstream parties to English devolution is that of trying to address and balance the role of English MPs, perhaps within the parliaments, or to focus on the economic development of the city of the regions by means of city regions, the regionalist parties such as Yorkshire First are the only one who are actually focusing on the regional dimension altogether, emphasizing the democratic element of devolution for England. So emphasizing the need of having some form of regional parliaments for Yorkshire or regional assemblies that actually work as a kind of a meso level that brings together, that brings more democracy both from the bottom and also that work as a challenge, as a channel to bring the voice of the region at Westminster. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this general election, and also it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on the performance of these parties because they basically challenge mainstream politics at the moment.
And do you think that any of the regionalist parties might win a seat?
Well, that would be a fantastic result if they would win a seat. We have to keep in mind that these parties are very young, and so this is the first big electoral competition for them. I'm not sure whether they're going to win a seat, but I think that the interesting element is that they are there, and so they are posing some kind of challenge to mainstream parties. They may not win a seat, but let's say, for example, may not be the most likely scenario, but let's say, for example, if we see the election of a Labour government that has to have some sort of deal with SNP, for instance, could that be a way of, could the regionalist party work with the SNP in some, or develop some relationship with the SNP so as to bring also the regional case at Westminster? So I think it is going to be interesting to look at the post-election scenario and the way in which the parties, even though they are not going to win any seat, the way in which they're going to try to put some sort of pressure or create an important relationship with Westminster.
I think that regionalism is going to define this election. What we're going to see across England is that different parts of the country are going to have different political battles. So in the southwest of the country, we're going to see that the Liberal Democrats are going to come under sustained attack from the Conservatives. And yet in London, it is going to be Labour that is going to actually challenge the Conservatives and possibly win back a number of key seats. The problem for Labour is can they actually cut into middle England, into those areas that the Conservative Party have done strongly. But more than that, even if Labour do better in the southeast of England, that they've got serious problems in Scotland, particularly from the Scottish National Party. I'd like to turn to Dr. Catherine McGlynn to give us some analysis on the situation in Scotland.
Well, the SNP are expecting to win, and they are expecting to win big, that's clear. Not just the kind of bounce of the referendum. You might say, well, they actually lost the referendum, and yet the kind of overall story that they've managed to sell of how close it was, how positive the whole experience was against a no campaign, the experience of other nationalist parties, Parti Québécois, for example, after they lost the independence referendum, they did hugely well in regional and other elections. So they have that. They have the fact that stalwarts such as Gordon Brown are leaving seats, so there isn't that kind of sort of Labour familiarity to carry personal votes. They are hoping to win big, in part for their own success. They're also very concerned about English votes on English laws, because there is no such thing as English votes on English laws. In particular, financially, the implication of such a policy where spending levels affect what happened in Scotland and Wales, they know it's something that they need to tackle in constitutional terms. I think the big issue for them is if they do so well and Labour don't quite carry it off in England and need their support, is the fact that they, at the moment, have played both sides. They've been an anti-establishment party, who are the biggest party in Scotland. You think about the election debates, Nicola Sturgeon and the main Westminster debates, there she is, their outsider. Think how she was in Scotland with everyone having a pop at her. And if they are there at Westminster, that kind of party of Scotland, standing for Scotland aside from the fray, they're going to find that very, very difficult. So short term, yes, big gains. Long term, lots of headaches.
It's an interesting point, the idea that the SNP is playing a dangerous game, that it's one that they might actually find could cost them. I'm wondering whether you can see any recovery for Labour in Scotland, whether there is a potential that they might somehow turn the situation around.
In the short term, I think it might be difficult. I think Jim Murphy has been a good thing for Labour, and I think that they need just better personnel. They also need to kind of settle as a whole what Labour stands for. I mean, there's this kind of hilarious idea of red edge, but actually he hasn't really sort of nailed his colours to the mast that much. And in Scotland, though the kind of idea of this sort of very strongly socialist Scotland is overstated, those kind of left of centre values do play very well. If Labour could be coherent in the message that they sell about the economy, about what the role of the state is, it's not actually about territorial issues, it's just about having an actual coherent, we stand for this and we will do this. But all parties have been struggling with that lately.
What is clear, of course, is that we are now in a period of an era of coalition politics, and in many ways it brings together the different parts of the United Kingdom. And interestingly enough, it brings Northern Ireland into the centre stage, and particularly the role of the Democratic Unionist Party as a potential deal maker. Dr. Sean McDade, how do you think that the election is going to play out in Northern Ireland?
I think what's been fascinating about the current campaign in Northern Ireland is the extent to which issues in England and indeed Scotland have started to play out in public debate in a way that they haven't to the same extent before. So you have, for instance, some of the unionist leaders saying that the union, there's a threat to the union, and interestingly, that threat isn't being played as a nationalist threat within Northern Ireland. They're saying the Scottish Nationalist Party poses a threat to the union, and they've also, as you've said, related to the point about coalition, began to posit themselves as potential coalition partners for any party in the UK Parliament. We've seen Peter Robinson today, for example, say that the DUP would be willing to do a deal with either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. I think the problem for the DUP is, would either of those parties want to do business with the DUP? So it's a challenge for them. But while the debate has changed, I think very little is going to change in terms of the overall seats in Northern Ireland, possibly one gain for the DUP, that in Belfast East, where the Alliance Party's Naomi Long certainly faces a challenge from an agreed unionist candidate. But overall, I don't really see much more in the line of a change there, so more or less as you were, with the exception of one gain for the DUP.
And do you think that the DUP would be able to join a coalition wholeheartedly? Do you think that there are maybe issues about the nature of Northern Irish politics which could be a problem?
I think you'd be much more likely to see them in some sort of, supply and demand deal on a vote-by-vote basis. But at the same time, they've joined a coalition with their arch enemy Sinn Féin, and while that hasn't been that effective, it has worked to a limited extent. So, I mean, it's up for grabs. They're a very pragmatic party, if nothing else, the DUP. So they'll do what needs to be done if they get a good deal for Northern Ireland as they see it.
Thank you, Sean. It is clear that what we're seeing during this general election is an era of new politics. And in many ways, it's more interesting for us as political scientists to attempt to assess that, but at the same time, more difficult. I want to finish by asking our panel to do a little bit of stargazing and to give us some predictions on the general election outcome. Arianna.
Oh, that's the question that I really don't want to answer. I don't think anybody wants to answer that question. Well, we all know it's very tight at the moment. I'm not going to give you any prediction, but I think that the important element is how the coalition, because one way or another there is going to be a coalition, so how that is going to develop, how relationship within whatever coalitions and the colours involved in the coalitions are going to basically pan out in the post-election scenario. Polls say that Labour and Tory are pretty much at the same level. There is 1 or 2 points of difference at the moment, so they will have to join forces with someone else. With whom? Well, that's the big question then.
Indeed. Catherine?
Well, I agree, it's a very close call, and one factor also we haven't talked about is UKIP, who I think have had a very bad campaign actually, and haven't, a leader-focused campaign when the leader's not been on top of his game is obviously going to be problematic for them. I don't even know if they would actually win Thanet at this stage, but you think very, very tight seats. There are so many majorities that are a mere matter of 100 or even 500. Votes going to a smaller challenging party, UKIP or the Greens, would be enough to completely render any analysis technically hard to call. That's why it's so difficult, in part, the electoral system, which is disproportional, and these major sort of splits and factionalisms creating just all this kind of ping-ponging around of votes. It is Labour or Conservatives, but neither of them by themselves.
Well, if the famous United States statistician Nate Silver says this competition's too close to call, and I think that poses quite a challenge for the rest of us. So I think I would agree with the other speakers. A coalition in some form, but could be either Labour or Conservatives as a major party in that coalition.
My suspicion may well be is that whatever coalition is formed, either formal or informal, it will be so unstable that we could be back doing this once again later in the year. Who knows? But what we do know is that it's important that the people of Kirklees go out and vote on May the 7th, that they engage in this fascinating election, and that in many ways we wake up on May the 8th and we see what the electorate and our politicians are going to plan out for us in the future. This has been Andrew Mycock with the politics team from the University of Huddersfield, an election special. Thank you very much and good afternoon.